The ballroom was filled with light, music, and the sound of laughter. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, shining down on rows of decorated tables. Servants in neat uniforms walked quietly, carrying trays of food and drinks. At the center of it all, the wealthy guests enjoyed themselves, talking about business, art, and fashion. It was a night of power and pride. Among the staff was a young waiter named Daniel. He was tall, quiet, and always careful with his steps. He carried plates with steady hands and spoke politely whenever a guest asked him for something. Too many of the rich people there, he was invisible. Just another worker blending into the background. But Daniel had a secret that no one in the room knew. Behind his calm eyes, he carried the memory of his old violin. It was not with him now, but in his mind. He could still hear the sound of its strings. Years ago, before life pushed him into waiting tables, music had been his dream. He had practiced for hours every day, learning from old books and listening to street players in the park. But life had not been kind, and survival had forced him into other work. Tonight, he was only a waiter, nothing more in the eyes of the wealthy. At one of the long tables sat a rich woman named Mrs. Greenfield. She was dressed in a gown of silver silk, her jewelry bright enough to catch the eyes of everyone in the room. People knew her as proud and demanding. She liked to test the staff, sometimes making them do small tricks for her amusement. When she noticed Daniel moving quietly near her table, her eyes narrowed with curiosity. "Waiter," she called sharply, raising a hand. Daniel stopped, bowed slightly, and walked over to her side. "Yes, ma'am," he said politely. Mrs. Greenfield leaned back in her chair and studied him. "You carry yourself too carefully. Tell me, what do you do besides waiting on tables? You don't look like a man who belongs only to serving." Daniel lowered his eyes. He did not like to speak of himself. The guests around the table grew quiet, waiting to see how he would respond. "I work here, ma'am. My duty is to serve." That answer was not enough for her. She tapped her fingers on the table and gave a sharp smile. "I don't believe that is all. I can see something else in your posture. Tell me your hidden skill." "Everyone is one." For a moment, Daniel hesitated. He did not want to bring his old dream into this world of mocking eyes. But Mrs. Greenfield pressed harder. "Speak up, waiter, or do I need to guess?" Finally, in a soft voice, he answered, "I used to play the violin." The woman's eyes brightened with sudden amusement. Round her, the other rich guests laughed. Lightly, "The violin," she repeated. "Well, isn't that charming? A waiter with music in his past? Tell me, do you still remember how?" Daniel said nothing. His silence was enough to make Mrs. Greenfield smile wider. She raised her hand and called across the room. "Bring me a violin," she ordered the staff. The music from the hired band paused as one of the servants hurried to fetch an instrument. The guests whispered among themselves, some amused, others curious. Daniel felt heat rising in his chest. He had not touched a violin in years. His fingers had grown used to carrying trays, not dancing across strings. To be forced to play in front of these people for their entertainment felt like a cruel game. Yet he also knew refusing would risk his job, and jobs were not easy to find. Within minutes, a violin was placed in Mrs. Greenfield's hands. She looked at Daniel with a sly grin. "Well, waiter," she said, holding it out, "show us if your words carry any truth. Play for us, just one song, for fun." Daniel took the violin slowly, almost reverently. The weight of it in his hands awakened old feelings buried deep inside him. The guests leaned closer, waiting for what they thought would be a clumsy attempt, something to laugh at during their fine evening. Daniel stood still for a moment, his eyes closed, as memories of his childhood returned. The small room where he had first learned, the old bow that barely held its hair together, the street corners where he had once played for coins. His breath steadied. His hands adjusted to the instrument as though meeting an old friend. The room fell silent. The band members themselves watched, curious to see what this quiet waiter would do. Mrs. Greenfield smirked, sure that this would be nothing but awkward noise. Daniel lifted the bow, placed it against the strings, and began to play. The first note was soft, almost fragile. but it carried across the hall with a gentle beauty that caught everyone's ears. The sound was not clumsy at all. It was clear, full, and touched with emotion. The laughter at the table stopped at once, eyes widened. The guests leaned forward. Unable to look away, Daniel's body moved with the music. His bow glided smoothly. His fingers danced across the strings with precision. The tune that rose from the violin was not one of pride or wealth, but of longing, hope, and hidden strength. The walls of the ballroom seemed to vanish as the sound filled every corner. Some guests forgot to breathe for a moment. Others felt a strange stirring in their hearts. The rich woman who had demanded the performance sat frozen, her smile fading as she realized she had not uncovered a simple trick. She had uncovered a hidden star. Daniel's song rose higher, the notes trembling with power, then softened like a whisper of comfort. His music painted pictures in the minds of the listeners, memories of home, of dreams, of moments of love and sorrow. For the first time that evening, silence ruled the ballroom, not because of command, but because of wonder. When at last the final note faded into the air, Daniel lowered the violin. His chest rose and fell with deep breaths. The hall remained silent for a long second before the room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping, cheering, some even shouting words of praise. Mrs. Greenfield, who had thought she would laugh at a waiter fumbling with strings, was speechless. Her jeweled fingers pressed against the table as she tried to find words. But none came. The man she had thought to humiliate had instead stolen the night with pure talent. Daniel, still holding the violin gently, bowed his head humbly. He had not played for applause or wealth. He had played because the music inside him could not be denied. And though the guests clapped and cheered, one truth now shone brightly in their minds: this was no ordinary waiter. This was an artist who had been hidden in plain sight. The night had changed, though none yet knew how deeply. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling in the room stayed alive. Guests were still talking to each other in low voices, some nodding, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Nobody expected such a performance from someone dressed in a waiter's uniform. Daniel quietly handed the violin back to the servant who had brought it. He bowed slightly toward the guests, then turned as if ready to leave and return to his duties. But the people at the long table were not done with him yet. "Wait," said one man in a black coat, his voice sharp but curious. "Do not walk away so quickly. What is your name?" Daniel paused. He was not used to being the center of attention. He had always worked silently in the background. With a steady voice, he replied, "My name is Daniel, sir." The man leaned forward. "Daniel," he repeated. "Where did you learn to play like that? Surely not from books alone." Daniel's eyes lowered. "I learned from many small places, old players in the street, music from records, practice in quiet rooms. I had no teacher." The guests exchanged glances. A few of them whispered again, this time with more respect than mockery. It was rare to see such skill, without years of formal lessons. Mrs. Greenfield finally found her voice. Her smile had returned, but it was weaker now. She tried to recover her proud tone. "Well," she said loudly, "it seems our waiter has a hidden talent. Quite a pleasant surprise, wouldn't you agree?" The table nodded, but some of the guests were no longer looking at her. Their eyes stayed on Daniel. One woman with golden earrings clapped softly again, saying, "That music touched my heart. It was more honest than all the songs we have heard tonight." Daniel shifted uneasily. He wanted to return to the simple duty, to fade back into the background, yet he felt the weight of their stares. He bowed once more and said quietly, "Thank you for listening." As he stepped away, Mrs. Greenfield's voice followed him. "Do not hide again, Daniel. You will play for us later. We must hear more." He stopped for a moment, then gave a polite nod, though his heart felt heavy. He did not wish to become entertainment for their amusement. For him, music was life, not a trick. Still, refusing openly might cost him his position. He walked back, toward the side of the hall, where other waiters moved silently with trays. The other staff members had watched everything. Some looked at him with surprise, others with quiet admiration. One of the younger waiters whispered as Daniel passed, "I did not know you could do that." Daniel only smiled faintly and continued his work. He balanced glasses on his tray, but inside his chest, the music still echoed. For a few minutes, while he played, he had felt alive again. Meanwhile, the rich guests kept discussing what they had just seen. Some argued over whether he should be trained. Others wondered why such talent was hidden in a servant. One man, music patron named Mr. Allen, tapped his chin thoughtfully. That boy, Mr. Allen said to his companions, has a gift. A gift like that should not be wasted carrying plates. I must learn more about him. The band that had been hired for the evening felt uneasy as well. They were professionals, yet their music had not moved the crowd in the same way. Some of them whispered that perhaps Daniel had stolen their place without even trying. The night continued, but the focus of the evening had already changed every time Daniel passed through the room. Carrying food or wine, eyes followed him. Some people smiled warmly, others studied him as if he were an object of curiosity. Daniel did his best to ignore it, though he could feel the pressure on his shoulders. At one point, while he served a tray near the corner, a soft voice called to him. It was the woman with golden earrings, the one who had praised his music. She waved him closer. You play beautifully, she said kindly. Do not let anyone make you feel small. Your gift is rare. Daniel bowed his head in thanks. You are kind, madam. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me, do you own a violin? Daniel hesitated. The truth stung him, but he answered honestly. No, madam, I do not have one anymore. Her face softened with pity. That is a shame. A gift like yours should not be silent. She pressed a coin into his hand before he could protest. Use this, at least, to remind yourself that you are more than a waiter. Daniel tried to refuse, but she gently closed his fingers over it. Take it, she said firmly. Music must not die. He bowed again, his throat tight with emotion, and moved away. Not far from her, Mrs. Greenfield had been watching. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She did not like seeing her guest giving such attention to a simple waiter. In her mind, Daniel was still staff, and staff existed to serve. Yet even she could not deny the power of what she had heard. Later in the evening, as the ball reached its highest point, she clapped her hands to command attention. The music from the hired band stopped again. Ladies and gentlemen, she declared, I believe we all remember the fine surprise we had earlier tonight. Our very own waiter, Daniel, showed us he can play the violin with remarkable grace. I suggest we end this night with one more song from him. What do you say? The crowd responded with cheers and agreement. Many clapped again, calling for Daniel. Daniel froze where he stood. He had hoped to escape further notice, but now the entire hall was watching him again. The servant hurried forward with the violin once more. This time, Daniel did not take it immediately. His hands remained at his sides. A hush fell as people waited to see if he would accept or refuse. Inside him, two voices argued. One told him to stay quiet, to avoid drawing more attention, to keep his job safe. The other reminded him that music was his soul, and if he denied it now, he would lose more than a job. He would lose himself slowly. Daniel stepped forward. His fingers closed around the violin. The crowd cheered softly. He lifted the bow again. But before he played, his eyes scanned the faces before him. He saw hunger for entertainment, but he also saw true curiosity, perhaps even respect. For the first time in years, he felt like a musician again. He drew the bow across the strings, and the second song began. This time, it was not only beautiful, it was powerful. The notes rose like fire, sharp and bright, then dropped like rain, soft and healing. It was music that spoke of struggle and strength, of pain and of survival. Each sound told his story without a single word. People did not just clap when he finished. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others shouted his name. Mrs. Greenfield forced a smile. But deep inside, she felt uneasy. The waiter she had chosen to amuse her guests was no longer her toy. He was the star of the evening. And though Daniel bowed humbly once more, he could not stop the spark of hope that had been lit inside him. The night was no longer the same, and neither was he. The night after the ball, Daniel could not sleep. He lay on the thin bed in his small rented room, staring at the ceiling. His hands tingled as though the violin were still in them. Every note he had played echoed in his mind. For years, he had buried his music, treating it as a forgotten dream. But now it had returned with such force that he could not push it away. He thought about the way the guests had looked at him, some with shock, others with admiration. Even the applause still rang in his ears. It felt strange, almost unreal. He had gone to work expecting nothing more than another long evening of service. Yet he had ended the night as the focus of the grandest ball in the city. At the same time, Worry gnawed at him. What if the owners of the hall thought he had stepped out of line? What if Mrs. Greenfield decided she had been disrespected? A waiter was not supposed to stand in the center of the floor. A waiter was supposed to serve quietly. But as the days passed, something unusual began to happen. The story of the ball spread. Guests who had attended spoke about it to their friends. They told the tale of the silent waiter who picked up a violin and left the entire room speechless. Soon, whispers reached people Daniel had never met, musicians, teachers. Even patrons of the arts heard about the mysterious young man. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, but others grew curious. At the hall, Daniel noticed small changes. A few of the wealthy guests who returned for other events looked at him differently. They greeted him with smiles, some even calling him by name. One man stopped him and said, "You must play again sometime." That was no ordinary music. Among the staff, too, the mood had shifted. Some treated Daniel with more respect, whispering about his hidden gift. Others looked at him with jealousy, as though his sudden attention might bring trouble. One evening, as Daniel cleared glasses from a table, a familiar figure approached. It was the woman with golden earrings, the one who had spoken kindly to him during the ball. She introduced herself properly now. "My name is Mrs. Evans," she said. "I did not have the chance to speak more with you that night. Your music was the most honest I have ever heard. I wish to help you." Daniel blinked in surprise. "Help me, madam," she nodded. "I belong to the city's music society. We support young talents, but usually they come from schools and wealthy families. You, Daniel, are different. You have no teacher, no background, yet you play as though you were born for it. I would like to see you perform again before people who can open doors for you." Her words lit a spark in Daniel's chest, but he answered carefully, "I am grateful, madam, but I do not know if such doors are meant for me." Mrs. Evans gave a gentle smile. "Talent is meant for everyone, Daniel. Do not let the world tell you otherwise. Tomorrow, come to the Music Society Hall. I will arrange it." Daniel hesitated, but finally agreed. That night, he walked home with a strange feeling. Fear and hope mixed together inside him. For so long, he had been silent, and now someone wished to raise his voice. The next day, Daniel finished his morning work at the hall, then went to the address Mrs. Evans had given him. The building was large, with tall windows and polished doors. Inside, men and women sat around, discussing music, art, and culture. When Mrs. Evans led him in, heads turned. Some looked doubtful when they saw his plain clothes. But Mrs. Evans raised her hand and introduced him proudly. "This is the young man I spoke of, the waiter who stunned the ballroom." Some laughed lightly at the idea. One man muttered, "A waiter? Surely you exaggerate." Mrs. Evans did not argue. Instead, she asked that a violin be brought. When it was placed in Daniel's hands, she said softly, "Play for them." Daniel closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began. This time, he chose a simple melody he had learned as a boy. The notes rose gently, filled with warmth. Slowly, the doubtful expressions faded. The music grew, flowing with passion and skill. Even the harshest critics in the room leaned forward, unable to deny what they heard. When the last note ended, silence hung heavy. Then, applause broke out, not polite but sincere. One of the older men, a respected teacher named Mr. Collins, stood up. "Remarkable," he said. "This boy plays without training, yet he holds the violin as though it were part of him. His music has a voice that no lesson could create." Others nodded in agreement. A few began to talk excitedly about possibilities, with training, with guidance. Perhaps this young man could rise far. Daniel bowed humbly, but inside he felt something. He had not dared to feel in years hope. Afterward, Mrs. Evans pulled him aside. You see, Daniel, you belong here as much as anyone. I will arrange for you to meet more people, to give you chances to play. But remember, talent attracts both friends and enemies. You must be ready. Her warning was true. Not everyone who heard Daniel was happy for him. Back at the ballroom, Mrs. Greenfield heard the news of his visit to the Music Society. She did not like it. To her, Daniel was still her waiter, someone she had discovered. She began to tell people that his rise was only because of her generosity. Meanwhile, the hired musicians from that night whispered among themselves with bitterness. They had studied for years, yet one waiter had stolen the attention of the city. Jealousy grew, and some spoke of ways to push him aside. But Daniel did not think of them. He thought only of the music and the chance that had been offered to him. For the first time, the dream that had once died now stood before him again. That evening, when he returned to his small room, he took out the coin Mrs. Evans had given him at the ball. He held it in his palm, staring at it under the dim light. To others, it was just money. To him, it was proof that his gift had value, that he was more than invisible. He whispered softly to himself, I will not let the music fade again. And with that promise, Daniel's journey truly began. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's name began to travel quietly across the city. What had started as whispers after the ballroom night slowly grew into stronger talk. People in music circles spoke about the waiter who played as if his soul lived in the strings. Some called it luck, others called it talent, but all agreed it was rare. Mrs. Evans continued to support him. She arranged for him to play at small gatherings, not grand balls, but private evenings where people truly came to listen. Each time, Daniel stepped forward nervously, but as soon as the bow touched the strings, his fear disappeared. His music filled the rooms with warmth, sadness, and strength. Listeners were moved, some clapped. Some sat silently with tears in their eyes. For many, it was the first time they had felt such honesty in music. They told their friends, and soon, more people wished to hear him. Daniel still worked as a waiter in the ballroom, but his life was no longer the same. Guests recognized him. Some asked him when he would play again. Others looked at him with envy. Among the staff, too, feelings were mixed. A few were proud of him, but others whispered that he was forgetting his place. One evening, while carrying a tray, Daniel overheard two of the hired musicians speaking. It is unfair, one said bitterly. We studied for years, yet this waiter steals the stage. The other replied, it cannot last. He has no training. He will fail soon, and people will forget him. Their words pierced Daniel's heart, but he did not let them show on his face. He kept walking, reminding himself that he did not play for their approval. He played because the music demanded to. Mrs. Greenfield, however, had grown restless. She liked to boast that she had discovered Daniel at her tea parties. She told her friends, it was I who first made him play. Without me, he would still be invisible. But in truth, she was jealous. Each time Daniel's name was mentioned in the city, her pride felt weaker. One night, during another ball, she called Daniel forward again. Her voice was sweet but sharp. Daniel, bring a violin. Play something for my guests. After all, they are eager to see the talent I have shown the world. The crowd clapped politely, but Daniel felt her words like chains. Still, he bowed and obeyed. He played, and again the room grew silent. But this time he noticed something. He was not playing for joy. He was playing under command. When the song ended, he bowed quickly and left the stage, his chest heavy. Later, Mrs. Evans found him outside the hall, standing in the cool night air. She asked gently, why do you look troubled? Your music was beautiful. Daniel sighed. It no longer feels mine when I am ordered to play. It feels like I'm still a servant. Even when I hold the violin. Mrs. Evans nodded with understanding. Then you must choose carefully. Daniel, if you let others use your gift only for their pride, You will lose the heart of your music. Play when it is true, not when it is forced. Her words stayed with him. Soon after, an invitation came from Mr. Collins, the respected teacher from the Music Society. He asked Daniel to join a public recital where young musicians displayed their skill. It was a chance for Daniel to show his talent to a larger crowd, one filled not with wealthy partygoers, but with people who loved music itself. Daniel agreed. Though nervous, he practiced whenever he could, borrowing an instrument from the society. His fingers, once stiff from years of waiting tables, grew quicker and steadier with each passing day. He poured his heart into every note, determined not to waste the chance. When the day of the recital arrived, Daniel stood backstage, dressed simply but neat. The hall was full, not as grand as the ballroom, but filled with eager faces. Other young musicians tuned their instruments, their eyes glancing at him with doubt. To them, he was an outsider. When his turn came, Daniel stepped onto the stage. For a moment, fear gripped him as he faced the crowd. But then he remembered the quiet nights of practice, the kind smile of Mrs. Evans, the coin she had placed in his hand, and the promise he had made to himself never to let the music fade again. He lifted the bow, and the song began. This time, he played not for applause, not for pride, but for truth. His music told the story of a man who had worked in silence, of dreams lost and found again. It carried the weight of struggle and the light of hope. The hall grew still. Every face was turned toward him. The young musicians who had doubted him forgot their pride, listening with open mouths. Teachers leaned forward, astonished. Even the hardest critics sat motionless, their pens still. When the last note ended, the silence was deep. Then came the sound of clapping, loud and long. People rose to their feet. They shouted his name. They called for more. Daniel bowed deeply, his heart racing. Never before had he felt such a pure connection with listeners. This was not forced amusement for wealthy guests. This was real. Backstage, some of the other musicians approached him, their earlier doubt replaced with respect. One even said, "You play as if the violin itself is alive. I have never heard anything like it." Mr. Collins placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You must continue, boy. You have a gift that comes once in a lifetime. Do not waste it." News of the recital spread quickly. The city now spoke not only of the waiter from the ballroom, but of the new musician rising among them. Invitations began to arrive, small concerts, gatherings, chances to play before more people. But with the growing light of opportunity came darker shadows. Mrs. Greenfield felt her control slipping. She told people that Daniel was becoming arrogant, that he owed everything to her. The jealous musicians whispered harder, saying he was only a passing storm, not a true artist. Daniel heard the whispers but did not let them drown his heart. Each evening, when he touched the violin, all doubts melted away. One night, standing alone in his small room, he whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning. The music will lead me where I must go." Yet he did not know that with every step higher he climbed, more eyes watched him, not all with kindness. The stage had welcomed him, but the battle to remain there was just beginning. Daniel's life changed faster than he had ever imagined. A few weeks earlier, he had been invisible, moving quietly with trays in the ballroom. Now, his name was spoken in music halls, drawing rooms, and even printed in small columns of the city's newspapers. People described him as the silent waiter who woke the violin for Daniel. Each new chance to play felt like a blessing, yet it also carried pressure. Crowds now expected him to astonish them every time. The freedom of his first performances was replaced by the heavy eyes of critics and rivals. Mrs. Evans continued to guide him. She reminded him often, "Play for truth, Daniel, not for applause. If your heart leads, the rest will follow." He held on to her words, though it grew harder with each performance. One evening, after a concert, Daniel was approached by a man in a fine suit. His name was Mr. Howard, a wealthy patron who supported many artists. "You have promise, young man," Mr. Howard said smoothly. "With my backing, you could play in the grandest halls of the country. But you must listen carefully. Talent is nothing without control. You must dress finer. Move with elegance and play the pieces I select for you. Audiences love beauty, not raw truth. Daniel bowed politely, but inside he felt uneasy. To play pieces chosen only for popularity meant losing his voice. Still, he thanked Mr. Howard for the offer and promised to consider it. Later that night, he shared the encounter with Mrs. Evans. She frowned. Be careful. Some see you as a shining coin to be spent for their pride. Do not let them buy your soul. Meanwhile, jealousy around him sharpened. The hired musicians from the ballroom began spreading harsher rumors. They claimed Daniel was stealing others' work, that his story was a trick to gain sympathy. A few even said he faked his past to seem humble. Daniel ignored them, but whispers have power. Some listeners arrived at his concerts not to hear, but to judge. Their eyes were sharp, waiting for him to stumble. One night, during a recital at the Society Hall, Daniel noticed three men in the front row whispering and smirking. He tried to ignore them, but their mocking eyes weighed heavy. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the bow. The first notes came out thin, weaker than usual. The crowd shifted, sensing his unease. A murmur ran through the room. Daniel's heart pounded. For a moment, he feared they had been right, that he did not belong here. Then he remembered the coin Mrs. Evans had once pressed into his hand. He remembered the promise he had made not to let the music fade. Closing his eyes, he took a slow breath and began again. This time, he played not for the critics, but for himself. His music grew stronger, filling the hall. The mocking whispers fell silent. The smirks faded. By the end, the same men who had doubted him sat quietly, unable to deny the truth in his sound. The applause came louder than before, but Daniel hardly heard it. Inside, he felt relief. He had faced the test of doubt and found his strength again. Still, shadows did not leave him. Mrs. Greenfield, who had first forced him to play, was angered by his rising fame. To her, Daniel's success was a story in which she should always be the main character. She began attending his concerts, sitting in the front row with her silver gown and sharp smile. Afterward, she told anyone who would listen, "You see, without me, he would be nothing. I gave him his first chance." Her words reached Daniel's ears. He did not answer her publicly, but in his heart, he knew she had not given him freedom. She had only tried to use him as entertainment. The true gift had come from his own courage to play. As his name grew, invitations came from beyond the city. Letters arrived from other towns asking him to perform. One even came from a foreign society, offering him the chance to travel overseas. The thought filled Daniel with both excitement and fear. He confided in Mrs. Evans, "I do not know if I am ready. I still feel like a waiter pretending to be a musician." Mrs. Evans placed her hand gently on his arm. "You are not pretending. The music proves it, but you must decide who you are playing for. If you carry doubt with you, it will weigh down your bow. If you carry truth, the world will listen." Daniel nodded slowly. Her words gave him courage. Yet he still wondered if the world outside his city would welcome him or laugh at him. At the same time, new challenges rose inside him. The more he played for larger crowds, the more tired he grew. Late nights, endless practice, constant travel, it all wore on his body and spirit. Sometimes, when he looked at the violin, he felt both love and exhaustion. One night, after a long performance, Daniel walked alone through the empty streets. He sat on a bench under a lamp and stared at his hands. They ached from hours of playing. He whispered to himself, "Am I losing myself again? Am I playing for truth, or just chasing applause?" In the silence, the memory of his first song at the ballroom returned to him. He had played then not for pride, not for fame, but because the music demanded to live. That memory steadied him, but he knew greater tests were still to come. The very next week, he received an invitation to perform at the grandest hall in the city, the Royal Theatre. It was a place where only the finest musicians played, a stage that could lift a career to the highest heights or crush it under the weight of judgment. The invitation thrilled him, but also filled him with dread. Every critic, every rival, every jealous eye would be there. Mrs. Greenfield, too, would surely attend. ready to remind the crowd of her claim over him. As he held the letter in his hand, Daniel felt the full weight of his journey pressing down. The waiter who once carried trays quietly was now asked to carry the hopes of an audience, larger than he had ever faced. That night, he stood by his small window. Looking out at the city lights, he whispered, "If I step onto that stage, I must give them not just sound, but my soul. Only then will they know who I truly am." The Royal Theatre awaited. The test that could define his future was near. The evening of the Royal Theatre performance arrived like a storm. Daniel had not slept much the night before. His hands shook whenever he thought of the giant hall, the bright chandeliers, and the sea of faces that would watch him. He had played for large crowds before, but this was different. The Royal Theatre was a place where legends were made or broken. Mrs. Evans stayed beside him. All through the day, she reminded him, the stage is not your enemy. It is only a place where truth can be shown. Let your music speak, and no hall will silence it. As they arrived at the theater, Daniel saw carriages lined in rows. Gentlemen in fine coats and ladies in silk gowns stepped out, eager to be part of the night. The name Daniel, the violinist, was written boldly on the grand poster outside. He paused when he saw it. His name, once unknown, now shown in golden letters for all to read. Inside, the hall glittered. The ceiling was painted with angels, and thousands of candles burned in tall holders. The seats filled quickly, every row buzzing with whispers about the young man who had risen from nothing. Some came with admiration, others with doubt. Critics sharpened their pencils. Ready to judge, rivals sat stiffly, hoping he would falter. Daniel waited behind the curtain, violin in hand. His heart pounded so loudly he thought others might hear it. He closed his eyes and remembered the first time he had played in the ballroom, when music had spilled out of him as if it had been waiting all his life. That memory gave him strength. The stage manager called his name. The curtain rose. The hall fell silent. Daniel stepped forward into the golden light. The size of the audience struck him, hundreds of eyes fixed on him, every ear ready. His breath caught, but then he lifted the violin. The first notes rose soft and trembling. At once, the hall grew even quieter. People leaned forward. Daniel's bow found its rhythm, and the trembling faded. The melody grew fuller, stronger, flowing across the vast space like a river. He played not as a performer showing skill, but as a man telling his story. Each note carried pieces of his life, the loneliness of forgotten days, the sudden burst of discovery, the battles with doubt, and the fire of hope. Listeners felt it. Some closed their eyes, others held their breath, afraid to break the spell. At one point, Daniel noticed Mrs. Greenfield sitting in the front row. She wore her silver gown and smiled as though claiming credit for him. For a moment, the sight disturbed him, but he remembered Mrs. Evans's words, "Play for truth, not for applause." He turned his eyes away from Mrs. Greenfield and let the music carry him higher. The piece rose toward its peak. Daniel's bow moved swiftly, his fingers flying. But it was not speed that impressed, it was the heart within the sound. The notes were alive, filled with longing, pain, and joy all at once. By the final chord, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. When silence fell, it was deep and heavy. Then came the applause, first a few claps, then more, until the hall thundered with it. People stood from their seats, cheering. The sound filled the theater like a storm of approval. Daniel bowed, his chest rising with relief. For the first time, he felt not just like a boy who had stumbled into music, but like a musician who belonged. After the concert, many crowded around him. Critics spoke eagerly, praising his passion. Admirers asked about his journey. Some even begged for lessons. But Daniel noticed Mrs. Greenfield among them. She leaned close and said, "You see, I told you the world would adore you. Remember, without me, you would still be carrying trays." Her words tried to chain him, but Daniel only bowed politely. He did not argue, for he knew the truth. Her claim meant nothing compared to the freedom he had found in his music. Later, when the crowds had gone, Daniel and Mrs. Evans walked together outside. The night air was cool, the city lights shining across the river. Daniel held the violin case close to him. I was so afraid, he admitted softly. But when I played, it felt as if the music lifted me higher than fear. Mrs. Evans smiled warmly. That is the gift. Fame may come and go, but if you let the music lift you, you will always be free. Daniel looked at the stars above the theater. For the first time, he truly believed her. But even as joy filled him, he sensed that the journey was not finished. Letters would come, invitations would multiply, and temptations would rise. Some would try to guide him, others to own him. The test of the Royal Theatre was only one step. The greater challenge would be to remain true to himself as his fame spread wider. That night, alone in his small room, Daniel placed the violin on the table and sat quietly. He whispered, "I will not forget. This music is not for pride. It is for truth, for freedom, for life itself." The sound of applause still echoed in his memory. But deeper than applause was the echo of the music itself, the voice that had awakened within him and would never fade again. After the Royal Theatre performance, Daniel's life changed completely. Invitations poured in from cities near and far. People wanted him to perform at concerts, private events, and grand halls. Newspapers praised him, calling him the young violinist who rose from silence. At first, Daniel felt excitement. He had dreamed of music, but now the dream had grown bigger than he had imagined. He saw possibilities he had never dared hope for. Yet, alongside the excitement, worry crept in. The more attention he received, the more he felt the weight of expectation. One afternoon, Mrs. Evans visited him at his small room. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Daniel, you must think carefully. The world will offer you riches, fame, and comfort, but you must decide who you want to be. Do you want to play for yourself, or only to satisfy others?" Daniel thought about her words long and hard. He remembered the first night he had lifted the violin in the ballroom, playing, not for applause, but because the music lived inside him. That was the moment he had first felt free. Over the next few days, he visited different venues, meeting wealthy patrons, teachers, and musicians. Each meeting was polite, but many wanted to shape him. Some asked him to change his style. Others wanted him to dress differently, act differently, perform on their terms. Daniel felt uneasy. Late one night, he returned to his small room and sat quietly. He held his violin. Its worn wood had become familiar, almost like a friend. He whispered to himself, "I play because I must, not for gold, not for praise, only for the music." The next morning, an invitation arrived from a famous society in another city. They offered him a long contract, a chance to tour for a year, with all expenses paid. It was a dream for many musicians. Daniel held the letter in his hands, feeling the weight of choice. Mrs. Evans noticed his hesitation. "It is a great honor," she said softly. "But remember, the path you choose now will shape not just your career, but your heart." Daniel nodded. He knew she was right. Fame and riches were tempting, but they could also pull him away from the music that had first given him life. Days later, a small event brought the decision into focus. A young girl approached him at a local recital. She held a tiny violin and looked at him with wide eyes. "I want to play like you someday," she said shyly, "but I do not have anyone to teach me." Daniel knelt down beside her and smiled. "You can learn. Music belongs to everyone who loves it. The gift is inside you already." He spent the next hour teaching her simple notes and melodies. She laughed when she played the right notes, her joy filling the room. For Daniel, the feeling was stronger than applause, stronger than contracts or recognition. He realized that music meant more than fame. It was about sharing, teaching, and touching hearts. That evening, Daniel made his choice. He would accept invitations to play, but only those that allowed him to remain true to his heart. He would perform, yes, but he would never let anyone take his freedom to decide what to play, how to play, or why he played. He sent polite letters to patrons and societies far away, declining offers that would control him. Some were disappointed, but others respected his honesty. His name continued to spread, not because of grand contracts, but because People sensed the truth in his music. Mrs. Greenfield heard the news of his decisions. She was frustrated. She had wanted to see him controlled by her and by the wealthy. But Daniel was free. She could no longer claim him as her discovery. Yet Daniel did not feel fear or anger toward her. He simply knew that his life and music were his own. Over time, Daniel's performances became more than concerts, they became experiences. Audiences felt his heart in every note. Children learned from him. Young musicians sought guidance, and even rivals began to respect his dedication. His fame was no longer a burden because it did not control him. He chose what mattered most, the music itself. One evening, after performing a piece he had written himself, Daniel stood in the quiet hall, listening to the soft echo of the last note. Mrs. Evans joined him, smiling proudly. "You have done it, Daniel. You have found your way. You play freely, and the world listens because it knows your heart is true." Daniel nodded, feeling calm and complete. "I was afraid at first," he admitted, "but I understand now. Music is not only about skill or applause, it is about honesty. It is about giving a piece of yourself to the world." Double quotes. Mrs. Evans patted his shoulder. "And because you give it sincerely, it will always return to you, stronger than before." Daniel left the theater that night with his violin case in hand. He walked through the streets, the city lights shining above, and he felt peace for the first time in years. He had learned that music was more than talent. It was courage, honesty, and freedom. He remembered his first night in the ballroom, when he had played quietly, almost in secret. The applause had been wonderful, but the true gift had been the moment when he allowed the music to flow without fear. That same gift guided him now, and it would guide him always. Daniel knew the road ahead would have challenges. Critics, jealous musicians, and people who did not understand him would always exist. But he also knew something stronger, his choice to remain true to himself and to the music. And so, Daniel continued to play, not as a servant, not as a performer, controlled by others, but as a man who had found his voice. He performed for the joy of sound, for the beauty of life, and for the people who listened with their hearts, through every note, every melody, every song. Daniel told his story. It was a story of patience, courage, and freedom, a story that began with a violin in the hands of a young waiter and grew into a life that belonged entirely to him. The city would always remember the boy who played in the ballroom. But those who truly listened would remember something more, the music of a heart that refused to be silent. Daniel smiled as he looked at his violin. "This is only the beginning," he whispered, and he knew it was.